And yeah, I would like to start talking a little bit, giving a little context to my work. Then I will hand the presentation to Ignacio, and yeah, so we could engage also in questions and conversation afterwards about what we did together for NADA. But I will start presenting a little bit of background for my work, because actually it has been an interesting process, not that certain or that clear. So actually the presentation at NADA became like an opportunity to actually figure out what was this work about. I wanted to show a work that I started in 2015 that I called at that time the Cornucopia Archive. I was very interested in some ways of collecting and building an archive. I was also following the traces of Lina Bobardi in Brazil in a collection, the Colecção do Nordeste, that she made in Salvador de Bahia. And I did this by just collecting normal and very daily life materials, objects. And I think I had the recent experience of moving from one continent to another, and that made me be super aware of what you can bring, what you can carry, like when you need to leave things behind, when you need to get rid of objects. And when I moved to the Netherlands, I started from zero in terms that I didn't have any object. So it was like a new opportunity to start thinking about my relationship as an artist with objects in a completely new way. And I started to collect many things. And after like 2 years of collecting, I started to reflect about these collections. What was it? Why was I collecting? I didn't had it so clear. And then I started to like follow these other collections or archives of objects, like the one of Lina Bobardi, and it started to make like some sort of sense. I was trying to understand my material surroundings. I think through these objects, I was trying to read something. And that's how I started also to unfold my collection of objects and to show it to others. And through this presentation came, for example, this acknowledgement that there were some items that repeated. And few of those were these erasers. And that's how I came to this cornucopia archive that was like a small installation. Of course, I thought about what was like the whole story of the gums and the erasers, where they came from, also like what they meant as erasure. But then it also became like this sort of, it repeated and repeated. And then from the very first time that I presented this installation, it started to happen that people approached me. There were many visitors, people that I didn't know, that came to the exhibition, and they came with an eraser. So they also came with stories. They say, oh, I also collected erasers. And slowly there were people approaching me or approaching someone in the art space and actually handling new erasers or telling stories about these collections of erasers. So at one point, I became to start be like filled with erasers by friends, by close people, but also by visitors and people that I didn't know. And that's why I call it Cornucopia Archive, because it was growing and growing and growing. And I started to have like different separate branches of it. So yeah, basically I started to develop a practice that was related to collections and to the practice of gathering. And somehow like there were some reactions and other people that reacted to my gathering. So for example, you see here the Cornucopia Archive presented next to that collection of dice. And those dice were actually sent to me by someone who followed what I did. And one day this person said to me, Martin, you know, I had this collection of dice for many years, and I think now is the moment that you have it. And she sent it by post. So there was some magnetic thing that carried this way of doing, and I started to notice it, and I just allowed it to be. This connects me to a second work that I want to share with you that somehow relates to what I'm presenting at NADA, and that is my Musée Legitime. In 2017, I started a museum inside a hat. I did it after Robert Filiou, a French artist who in the year 62, he did a gallery in his cup. By different circumstances, he invited different artist friends to contribute with an artwork that would be small enough or immaterial, so he could put inside his cup. And this allowed him to be like this nomad exhibition space, but he was selling the works. And after an invitation to do an exhibition called Chinese Whispers, I decided to reenact this gallery, but in the shape of a museum. So I was not selling the artworks, but I was acting more like as an institution, more like as a museum, nomad archive. Ignacio is part of the collection, is one of the artists in the collection at the moment. So that's one of more things that connect us from many others. But the interesting thing is that after a while, it started to happen the same as I mentioned with the erasers and the rubbers, that many people start to approach me. So from the very first presentation, I thought that it was going to be one-time reenactment, one-time performance. But from the very first day that I presented it, there were 3 artists that approached me willing to give me something for my museum. And let me be clear, I don't just ask for objects, but also I ask for a story with the object. So every time I do the unfoldings or the presentations, I come to a place with my cup, with the pieces inside, I wear them, and I take the hat off, and I present the pieces that I am carrying at the moment with their stories. So it became like a proper institution along the time. Now there are 6 museum buildings. And I'm showing this because this connected me very much with the idea of an object or a thing that carries a story and that you carry around. And it also somehow connected to memory. Why I'm telling all this? Just to come to this collection of Artesania Carcellaria. These are like crafts made in jail. This is a collection by the Museo de la Memoria, a memory museum in Santiago de Chile, and it's a museum devoted to preserve memory of the dictatorship times in Chile, and also to promote an active memory and thinking about human rights. And they hold this amazing collection of what they call a jail craft, Artesania Carcellaria. And these were pieces made by different political prisoners in the 70s and 80s in Chile that many times were imprisoned without any explanation. So many times they had to stay in these concentration camps or secret jails, or sometimes official jails as well. And they didn't have understanding of when they were going to go out of jail. So you can imagine it was very tough moments. Many were killed and murdered. Others were tortured. So it was in the most obscure times of the history of Chile. And many of the prisoners, in a repeated way, but without any knowledge of this, started to do these little crafts. Of course, it was not allowed to sometimes to work with materials or to save things, but they, like, with a lot of very smart, like, invented ways of carving, of weaving, of doing things. And after some interviews to many of them that survived these experiences, they say that these were exactly the things that kept them alive. It's a little bit like uncertain, but for example, this bone seahorse comes from a very like horror, like concentration camp in Santiago, where like the prisoners were completely blindfolded all their stay in this prison, that it was clandestine. And they said that all the thing that they could remember was when they went to the toilet, because there was this, in the sewage system, there was this, some sort of drawing of a seahorse. It was part of the industrial sewage system thing, almost like a logo. And many said that this logo somehow was the only icon, the only figure that they could remember, and they hold to it firmly. And many carved or made different interpretations materially into an object, almost like as a token, as a memoir, as a memento that gave them some sort of strength, or that kept them also busy. And that's how I connect to my piece. That is somehow like a conjunction of both processes. I was also collecting crosswords. I have been very interested in crosswords for a long time. I came to them because they were the last part of the news, the last part of the newspaper. I thought they were somehow marginal. They were also referring to pastimes, like to these moments in which you don't have any important to do. So they had like less importance. And I always did these configurations of crosswords because I was working with the hints. But since I was collecting them, at one point I was very interested in the shape, and I started to put them together. And I just want to read you a little story, and then I give the lead to Ignacio. This is a story that I wrote for a newsletter from the Apple Art Center here in Amsterdam. It was a project in which we wrote this material. Sorry, I will stop share a little so you can see my camera. But yeah. No, maybe it's okay. Yeah. It was a printed newsletter that we wrote with an art collective called To See the Inability to See, and with Arafe Riahi and Marge Fleurfoot. And there is one particular story that I want to share just to, as a side context for my piece. It says, a common way to alienate someone is to put them in prison without a clear accusation. A friend of mine who was in prison in Istanbul without explanation told me that in jail, the cells had little windows that looked out onto a patio where all the prisoners went to take some air. Since everyone could see through those windows, each detainee invented special techniques to separate themselves from their fellow prisoners' gazes. One woman covered her window with toothpaste. Someone else wove a small piece of fabric and used it as a curtain. But there was a Russian lady with a lifelong sentence who opted for something else. She collected crosswords from newspaper fragments and glued them next to each other to fill the surface of the window. This arrangement served a twofold purpose. It blocked the view from outside, while it was still possible for the lady to fill in the blank spots. Because all the puzzles were written in Cyrillic, it became a secret space only she could access. This setting made my friend think of my crossword collection. When my friend told me about this experience she had, and she reminded her so much of my crosswords, I was shocked because I always saw it as some sort of trivial pastime. But just to realize that there was somebody else doing it in a complete other context, some very similar practice, somehow struck me a lot. And when we received the invitation to do this presentation with Casanova for Nada House, there was this room full of windows that somehow was a problem in terms of what to present in this room, that it was like completely in every wall you would have windows. And even though it seemed like complicated, I thought immediately that I needed to show this piece, and somehow made a relation to the story of this Russian lady that for me became a little bit like a literary tale, but on the other hand, it's very concrete and material, and it's happening still right now. And that connects us to the work of Ignacio that is presented in the same room with the same windows. And then, yeah, I can pass you the... Thank you, Martin. That was interesting, the last part of the text. I really liked it, the story. And I feel like that's what I like about us working together in this room. That of course brings me back of the times that we used to do things together even in school, because I mean, probably some participants don't know, but I know Martin for a long time, since we were in school. So it's always nice to gather together and think and talk, and if we can do something together, it's even better. So yeah, also it was a coincidence, a big, beautiful coincidence that both exhibitions happened at the same time, the one in Amsterdam that you curated and the one in Nada House. And it kind of like traced a direction or something, or like 2 points of
like different attention and yeah. Wait, somebody's saying that there is an echo. Oh, Joyce, there is an echo. The feedback is distracting. Well, I don't know how to fix the echo, but do you hear an echo, Martin?
I
So
don't know.
I'll keep going. No, but that really, I mean, why I bring this up because I like the circumstances that sometimes happen. You know, like the thing that you were saying that because I know you, I know how you collect, I know how you like think organically this type of like new archive that you're creating, and then like how also these things appear in the meantime, like this story, these two things happening in different parts of the world, like the exhibitions and stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, I will try to um, approach from there to the the installation. My part of the installation I collaborated for Nada House, and um, I will start with the process of the first collection of watches I did and this was in Mexico City. Um, so Mexico City, I love Mexico City. I think it's a wonderful city and strikes my attention a lot. The thing that I do often when I go there is just walk around, right? And also that's somehow what I like to do in general. Is like when I'm somewhere else, like maybe everyone, I don't know, that is like just getting lost and wandering and feeling the freshness of being a stranger somewhere. So that in that kind of like thought motion, I encountered this person, one of many persons that are selling things on the streets of Mexico in that type of informal economy, I mean, context. So I was looking through those watches and then somehow I found this watch that really struck my attention. I mean, right now I'm showing this photograph that I have, but it wasn't like that when I found it. I found it completely, you know, dirty and non-working. But I brought it back to life and start thinking why I liked it. Of course, if you can see, the watch has political icon from the PRI, that is the main historical political party that had major influence in the history of Mexico. So then I realized that, how do you say siglas? The letters that are there are the letters of the name of Carlos Salinas de Gortari, which is the president of that time that in the 92 he signed the NAFTA agreement. So then I started like realizing that this object had somehow a potential to tell a story. So then I start going with my friend Matias Solar. He brought me to all these beautiful, crazy, different places to that he thought I would find more watches. But this was in the realms of the streets of Mexico. So it had that somehow tension or like environment that I really enjoyed. And I found this one of Ernesto Cedillo. I found this one that I really like of Partido Verde, which is like somehow very like corrupt party, which is doesn't looks like it, but it is. This is Roberto. He wanted to be president, he couldn't. But then so like I mean, I start noticing these stories about the watches because I went then to the El Archivo Nacional de Mexico, the National Archive of Mexico, and start gathering information of each of the parties and each of the presidents that these watches were referring to. And I found crazy stories, of course. I mean, like, how not to? There are all these political parties that somehow are dealing with each other. So of course, there is like a lot of things to know about them. And some of them are like fun, some of them are like insane, some of them are like very dark. But within that kind of like new collection, right? New pieces to configure something. I somehow like decided to frame a historic, I mean, to put it in poetic terms, a historic landscape of what happened since the NAFTA was signed until today. And that's how the installation looked. And following the presented watches, I I put in a adjacent wall the hours that I found with the information that I found. And like I would, here it's in Spanish, but I would try to translate one. So like it can be understood. Like the 9 a.m. one, it's connected to the, this one, Roberto one. And it says, it's probably the most funny story for me. It says like, it was a cold morning when the marathon in Berlin was initiated. For a surprise of few assistants, the winner was the presidential candidate Roberto Madrazo. The photographer of the event observed that at the moment that Roberto crossed the line, La Meta, he was super happy without any sweat, and he was looking very well, like physically. So then after that, a chip that it was in his shoe proved the factor for his the qualification, and he cheated, right? So there is a quote that says, oh, the thing that it strikes the most is the way that the Mexican participants celebrate his su llegada. Like, I don't know how to say that in English right now, but it's like when he won, like he extra celebrated. He was super exaggerating, like that he made it. So yeah, that's the kind of like stories I gathered, and that same type of kind of like architecture of working brought me to wanting to do something similar, but where I live here in New York and the US. And I was, okay, I will try to do an experiment and try to find, like watches that were from other political candidates, but from the US. And surprisingly, I found, but it was different because, like in Mexico, these political parties were giving away these watches as almost like a bribe, a bribe, like almost like buying people for them to vote for them. But also it worked like as a campaign, like you were showing your watch and you were telling like, oh, I got this cool watch, Roberto gave it to me or whatever. But the watches that I found here, I mean, also that's completely illegal, right? Because there is times for political campaigns. It starts in one month, and then in the other month it has to completely stop. Everything has to be removed from the streets, etc. But here I found some watches which was cool after long search, but of course the price was different. Of course, they were more commemorative. Some of them were for political campaigns too, but I'm 100% sure because of like the quality of them that they were not for giving them away. So that was interesting. And I started doing the same type of recollection of information too, and I try to connect each hour that I found interesting historically to an hour that the watch could portray. So I forgot to mention this before, but in these watches and in the other watches of Mexico, I somehow hacked them to get stuck in the hour that I chose. So for example, let's say 9 a.m., I find a way. I mean, I learned this in Mexico actually, like after going to many different like watch makers, how to stop the watch in this time and ticking. So it's alive, the watch is alive, right? But it's ticking in this particular time. So somehow gives like this idea of loop that it are like ticking forever. This like kind of like frozen time or something. So this is the hour that it relates to that Bill Clinton watch that it says. A giant sucking sound going south, Ross Perot exclaimed during the second presidential debate of '92. By 9:50, Mr. Bush was caught checking his watch to see how much longer the infrastructure quizzing will go on. Why do little things matter? After winning the 1992 election, Bill Clinton signed the NAFTA agreement, creating the world's largest free trade zone. Just a month after, in the headquarters of EZNL in Chiapas, Mexico, Subcomandante Marcos raised the question, what does the beast leave in exchange for everything it takes? So yeah, so this one in particular is also connected to the other show. So there is all of this like somehow kind of like a web, right, of connections that I like to create. And then these like loops that kind of like close these like somehow stories or like time lapses or like time periods or histories. So I thought
May I
like,
ask you something, Ignacio?
yeah.
Because then I'm noticing that there is something interesting now. Like you chose every watch to stop in a certain time to be somehow stuck on that time.
Yeah.
So it repeats this time again and again. And
Yeah.
then you connected it to this like text that has a particular story related to that exact time.
Yeah.
And somehow I'm seeing like, yeah, I think it's interesting because with my crossword collection, I did something similar. It's also connected with a text and with a story. So I'm also trying to, to look for resemblances because now we're presenting the crosswords along the watches and they follow like this, they are similar devices in a way.
Of course, I mean, I remember when we were thinking the installation, we were commenting on that somehow they are, and they kind of like measure something. They refer to something, and also they're like these somehow outdated devices too that we bring back and like kind of like, but we use them for something different, right? But I like also like the idea of like presenting this situation, right? Like the crosswords with the watches, and then like that's a new way of reading those, right? Like is we think of like, I don't know, museography and archiving and like the academy, for example, to put it easy, like the way that things are archived there has a complete different like end, and like it serves a completely different purpose too. But this one also serves a different purpose, and that's how somehow it become poetic, because then like you present or the idea of the archive is defragmented or something into this new kind of like way of reading, and that's what I feel like it's interesting.
Can I tell you something? Because I'm thinking of this, what you mentioned about being poetic. And yeah, I had to think of a story. It's crazy that I'm remembering now. But yeah, while you were talking, I thought, yeah, it's interesting because Ignacio's approach is like you are also this sort of collection of these events and at the same time collection of the watches. So I can really relate to that because I'm also like through collecting the crosswords, for example, and other people giving me crosswords is somehow like equivalent. I see them as parallel process. But then I'm also thinking you are working with these like big historical moments, like, and embedding them in the devices. And somehow I thought, yeah, I do something slightly different in terms that my stories are somehow more related to individuals, like more particular people. For example, this interest for these objects made by people that were in jail. It's still happening in a historical context, but it's very experienced by the individual. That is not, I'm not saying that they are opposition. I think that what you are presenting and these historical narratives are very affecting everyone and each of us and everybody in a way. But I was also thinking that in that sense, like they match interestingly the crosswords and the watches, because also like I thought and also encountered this, like for me, very unexpected story of this lady feeling like a prison cell with these crosswords. And somehow that brought a lot of meaning and it loaded the whole arrangement.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was the other way around. And
you remember
just,
it was completely like casual that uh, they happened to be in the windows. Because in the
totally.
beginning they were beyond the floor.
Exactly.
So
So it was really like and something that came, and
yeah.
I have to remember this story that I want to share with you because I'm somehow, yeah, it connects to.
Story that I just remember that I want to share.
But you know that, like what I thought right now is about, yeah, you know that I love this Argentinian poet called Antonio Porcia.
Yeah.
Well, he was like, yeah, it's a very interesting poet. I think I would recommend it to anyone listening this talk. And there was a talk given by Roberto Juarros, another Argentinian poet. And he really admired Antonio Porcia. And he talked about the poetic. And he said why the poetic was so important. It was a valid truth and it was real. And for explaining this, he used this very touching story. And it was one of the, he said, this is one of the only and the story that I have about my relationship with Antonio Porcia. And I'm also telling you this because we are friends. And somehow, yeah, after all these experiences, at one point, the political also becomes personal. And he told the following: Antonio Porcia was extremely poetic, and the poetic is a valid truth and is real because of this story that follows. There were two women in prison in very obscure times in Argentinian dictatorship, and they would share like separate cells, but they were super close friends since they were like teenagers. And one of them one night discovered that they were going to be killed the next morning. And then, yeah, it was super harsh. And then she realized that her friend didn't know because she was the only one able to listen to some of the people who were keeping them in the jail. And they allowed her to write a letter to her friend. So she wrote a letter to her friend knowing that the next day she was probably going to be murdered and her friend as well. And she wrote a letter in which she says, don't worry, everything will be okay. We will be out. Remember me. It will be better. It will go well. You don't have to worry. But on the corner of the page, she wrote like this poem that is by Antonio Porcia. And that was why Roberto Juarros was trying to explain why these poems became from everybody and why the poetic factor of them was so truthful and useful as well. Yeah. And she wrote this voice that I will say it in Spanish and I will try a good translation. It said, el amor, que no es todo dolor, no es todo amor. And that I would translate as like love, that is not all pain, is not all love. And Roberto Juarros said that how is it possible that someone that is going to die use this time to write a poem, and this poem? And he say, if poetry is not truth, if poetry is not reality, then I don't think what could be more real, or if there is even something real. And I heard that talk and I read it, and I always get super emotional when I hear it. And somehow, yeah, it came to me in this memory of also these situations that somehow kept us in with these limitations, also like these limitations of being a body, of being here, of confronting these historical and political processes. And yeah, I had to share it with you.
No, yeah, I remember you liked that poem a lot too. I remember when you showed me Antonio Porcia. It's like I love him.
I also mentioned it for this, like, yeah, in a very interesting way, it's also this relationship between processes, experiences, and certain text and certain poem. Also how we start to understand certain lived experience, also associating them with a certain way of telling, with a story, with a text.
Totally. No, totally. No, I just remember you know what, it's funny. I mean, this is maybe too personal, but I just remember the box. You remember that I gave you once? But it was so special. It was like from Peru or something. From that trip we went to Peru. And it was this like yellow box. I remember perfectly how the box was. And like I remember that it was like the moment that I had to leave the box and give it to you, it was so important because actually it was such a beautiful box, but you were doing these collections inside the box, so you needed the box. And we showed them in Italy after. You remember? Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, I mean it's just like made me think of like, you know, the kind of like what was important about the box, you know, it's like the content of the box. Is it the box, or is it like the story in between the box, you know? Or maybe all of them.
But you know, I have to think also of the watches in relationship to that, to these particular objects and items, that they become completely stuck in time and they become a memory. And you always will associate them with that memory. And they become mementos, like physical things that actually if we remember that story, it will always come back. And it's very amazing also how this could be like, these objects could become like triggers for memory.
Yeah, and like the things of memory too, like I think it really worked out with the crosswords, because the crosswords also, you know, rely on memory of like who is this person who did this, or like who, you know, like what's the name of that fruit that somehow. And again, it's like I love that it's like the way of like how we used to perceive the world, but it's now like kind of like presented as something different. I mean, there's like, yeah, there's like a kind of like a freshness in it, or like something kind of generous about it.
You know, I'm thinking that also the words talk in an interesting way. For example, you were talking about Bush and some particular decision he took. You could also have in a crossword like this sort of hint, US president. You would need to feel Bush. Like
I was thinking of like, oh, maybe like in the crosswords of Martin, because there's so many, right? Like it'll be like one like related to one of the presidents of the watches, or like the political parties or something. I mean, 100%, right? Because like, I mean, probably.
And yeah, you know, it's also interesting to think of objects and all what they represent in terms of social struggle, political dilemmas. Sometimes like objects contain more information from what we even think. We underestimate like this, all what we embed into objects.
True.
Like also when we say it's a memento, it's not something to take for granted. Like an object could be like some sort of, yeah, like it could trigger so many things in a way.
Yeah, no, also like I remember that at the end I also start collecting some crosswords for the missing crosswords. Like so then I have like few crosswords like here and there that I've been collecting trying to. So probably I'll send them to you.
But you know, I think that's also amazing for me from certain art practices that they go beyond like something very concrete, like collecting a crossword or being interested in a watch or being interested in a particular historical moment. Because I'm sure that many people approach you and if they follow what you're doing, I can definitely be sure that some people approach you and say, Ignacio, there is this particular moment in history. I think it would be interesting to you to learn about this moment.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting how the fact of repeating certain actions and repeating certain search and research, like it becomes some sort of trigger also for others to be involved. And what sometimes feels like very particular search, at one point you discover that there are many like different persons that are interested in the same thing. So we also become like some sort of, it's like, yeah, the role of the artist, at least in these works, I see it also as editors that bring together all this information. But at one point, these are very collective, constructed informations and experiences and stories.
Totally.
So
Totally. Means how it is presented is also how it will be read. So yeah, the whole idea of like representing or like presenting a different type of way of reading, I think. Kind of like what
I
it
think like when we just started to talk about this presentation and now I was thinking of this magnetic deviation and these compasses.
Oh, true. Yeah, yeah. Oh,
That get
the
like because of a particular magnetic deviation that happens with the axis of the earth, they
yeah,
lose their north.
yeah.
And
That
we
was
talk of it as a metaphor, like, yeah.
but what Fernand
Yeah,
Delier.
there was this Portuguese explorer, like Joao that experienced the first noted magnetic deviation. He was like this colonial voyager, like
And
he would
yeah.
go looking for new islands or new places to settle. And then, yeah, he experienced this magnetic deviation. And we were also thinking in relation to Nada and how the governor's island is actually an island. And also how islands sometimes also like they seem to have a different time than the mainland. And even though that's also kind of a fantasy, or maybe it's also concrete if we think like in physics. But yeah, I also wanted somehow to relate that to our past times and our stack time in the watches, and this pastime section that almost like swallow you and don't allow you to go away. And yeah, it's also interesting in these times to think of this installation at Nada that is also was somehow a challenge. And
I mean, it's always hard to work remotely. I think it's crazy now that you're in Amsterdam and I'm here.
totally. Maybe we should show also some photos of Suzu. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I forgot about yeah. So Suzu, it's the show that happened that Martin curated with Dong Young Lee and another friend that I don't remember her name,
With
um,
Valeria Marquezine.
but it was so cool, but at the same time crazy because it happened the same exact day. It opened the same exact day as the Nada House project, so it was all connected.
Totally.
And I remember you did a piece there that it had the answers of the crosswords, right? Am I
Yeah,
right? That is like hanging from. It's so nice. I love that piece.
you are completely right. So we had this show in Amsterdam going on. I will share the screen. And then, yeah, it was a group show that I curated with my artist book platform, Good Neighbor. And it synchronized crazily with Nada, and they were opening the same day. And yeah, Ignacio was part of the artists invited. and I want to go roughly to his work. Well, let's go first to your work.
No, pero yeah, I don't know.
So we basically invited different artists to think of art made with words or art as words. So in a way, it's an extension of what we were talking before about the presentation at NADA and how this like relationship between the object, the device, the artifact, and a particular text, a particular set of words that carry also add some meaning, or they can also confuse the meaning. They become like the good neighbor. They add something. And there was this installation by Ignacio, Stone Above Diamonds.
Yeah, it's like a fragment of a bigger installation. But it's also somehow has text in them. Yeah, because that was the kind of like image and text, right? And
yeah, like in Good Neighbor, we like this idea of relating image and text, or how the associations that are generated, how they work each other, and how they also do not a favor to each other, and they contaminate.
Yeah.
And Ignacio had these credit cards printed with these images from the shattered shops in the Fifth Avenue. And if you took one of these cards and swipe it through the screen, like they would be related to some texts that were actual sentences that Ignacio collected in the streets in New York, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Graffitis written by, pedestrians.
Here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I want to see the text piece that you did. That kind of like it's the answers of the crosswords.
Yeah, so also my piece in the show, because I also allow myself to have a piece, was this very long line. It's called Alinea, and it's somehow very connected to, here I have a better close-up. It's very connected to NADA, because actually while working for the piece at NADA of the crosswords, I had all the leftovers of the hints. I normally work with the hints because I'm interested in the word quality of them. If you take them outside the context of the crossword, they become like poetry to me. So I'm interested of this raw material of these hints that sometimes are very absurd. Sometimes they are like, if we do a close-up, here you have Jurassic Park, for example, or swelling in plants, occur by chance, life like fine wine, like fine wine. And what I did, so since I was presenting all my crossword collection for NADA, I didn't have a piece to show in Amsterdam, and I decided to just glue all the hints together and make this big line. And that was the work. So in a way, it was like the negative of the piece in Governor's Island.
I love it. Yeah. How long it is?
For this, I made it the whole size and the height of the room, but actually it has 6 meters and 45 centimeters. And so it's like, it's like 365 hints for 1 year of COVID, of pandemia. Oh, sorry. But yeah, let me come back to this one. But yeah, like in that sense, like now I'm thinking there are many, the fact of doing these devices that stop time in a way, it also allows you to, I think that's why also it works to put some sort of text, attach certain stories, have this conversation in a way. Maybe it's also some sort of faculty of art in general. Maybe it's not something that unique, but maybe it's also about making the context for talking about it and for sensing and for building some story out of these materials.
Yes, totally.
And the fact of attaching also very particular stories, because it's not that any stories, but it's also like I think of the watches as very precise in terms that it's a very particular time. It becomes also like I feel similar also to the Crosswords. For me, this story that came from this lady was extremely particular. This work somehow triggered that my friend talked to me about it. So that makes her to remind me. And yeah, I'm thinking that these tools are very important, particularly in these times of uncertainty, and also in which like that historical processes are so strong and they define so much of yourself, because at one point it seems that there is less potentiality for defining a story. And I think it's extremely important that we are still able to tell stories and to listen to them. How do you feel about that, Ignacio?
No, I mean, I agree. I just think that I was thinking on the piece of the the long piece still of the that it was in Amsterdam at the same time, kind of like the answer. It was like in somewhere very very far away physically, where it was like the other piece. So I just like that. Um,
Yeah, I'm very fond of these processes that synchronize, or things that happen at the same time, and somehow, yeah, I think you as well. I see in this work also is a work about synchronicity in a way.
yeah, in synchro time. Yeah,
Like sometimes, like synchronicity is like seen as this very, like in a positive way, but also sometimes there are disasters that synchronize, or that everything wrong happens at the same time. So I'm also not giving some value to it or some definition, but it's also like the fact that there are things that coincide, and somehow that's also a way of like establishing notes for constructing a story. I'm also thinking of fiction in a way, and also of how we record our experiences.
yeah, yeah.
Hi. Yeah, no, I was just gonna add to that. Hi, and just it's not really a question, but more just a comment, I guess, on how well the works kind of situate themselves within that room and in that space. And I think how they function in a way so similarly to the way those houses exist as lists cross these spaces that really are a cross section of like the personal and the political in terms of their history as like a space where, you know, the military and the Coast Guard live, but they're also people just live their lives there in a very personal way in these houses. They're very domestic as well. And I think those objects that you both presented in the spaces really speak to that connection in a way that I think you were both talking about. But it's, yeah, I don't know how, yeah, I mean, I know you're responding to the space, but I don't think, did either of you get a chance to visit ahead of time, or you were just kind of responding to the context that you knew about it?
I visit, and then I was talking with Martin over the phone and showing space and taking measures and like remotely, um, kind of like figuring out what to do. Yeah.
And I think it's nice that you mentioned that, Max, because also the first reaction when we had this room, like just with windows, the first reaction is like, oh no, it's so complex. Like I would prefer to not like to have walls, or to have like more. It was also like a challenge, but then it became very meaningful in a way. Also to like listen to the space and say, okay, like what do we have here, and to also not impose a work, but also like think of it as part of a thread, part of some sort of, also, yeah, if we want that part of a text that is there was also like a story. And in that sense, it gains some sort of meaning also of the whole nada at Governor's Island. So it also, maybe this could happen anywhere, but sometimes maybe I don't know, like I think artists tend to forget about the particular spaces. Of course, not everyone, and there are many site specifics, and there are works that are very about the space. but many times also as not, it's very dismissed the space. And I think that here in another house is also an invitation to think about the space in a way. And the context, that we are also working so much with context that then is also, I think, is like, it's almost redundant, but it's very important as well to think about it.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, you guys both approached it in a way that is very poetic and also just, I think, creates like almost like a little mini fiction that can come out of it, basically, that I think anyone going in there could kind of create this story with these works that is really just a beautiful way to approach it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thanks to you. And thanks also to Casanova for the invitation.
Yes, thank you, Casanova, and thank you everyone who joined us today. And yeah, we hope you can tune in for the next conversation.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you both, Ignacio and Martin. Yeah.
Thank you, Magdalene. I see you there.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Max. Bye, Martin.
Ciao.